The blood on his leg had long since dried to a permanent rust-brown stain that no amount of scrubbing could remove from the fabric of his trousers, and Harrison Vance knew that every person who looked at him saw not a man but a cripple who had failed to come home whole. He stood at the edge of Wheatland, Wyoming, in the autumn of 1867, his weathered carpetbag hanging from one shoulder and his cane gripped tight in his other hand, watching the dust devils dance across the main street as if they were mocking his inability to walk without support. The war had ended 2 years ago, but for Harrison, it would never truly be over. Every step brought a fresh reminder of the Confederate mine ball that had shattered his left leg below the knee at Shiloh, and every glance from a passing stranger felt like judgment for surviving when so many better men had fallen. The town was smaller than he had expected, just a handful of wooden buildings clustered along the muddy thoroughfare with the endless Wyoming grasslands stretching out in every direction. Harrison had chosen Wheatland precisely because it was small, because it was remote, because he hoped that here he might find work where no one knew him and no one would ask questions about his limp. He had been a ranch hand before the war, good with horses and cattle, and though his leg was ruined, his hands were still strong and his mind still sharp. Surely someone would give him a chance. The first place he tried was the Mercantile, a sturdy building with a false front and a hand-painted sign that read Anderson's General Store in fading red letters. A bell jangled as Harrison pushed through the door, and the proprietor, a balding man with wire-rimmed spectacles, looked up from his ledger with an expression of polite interest that quickly faded to something else when he saw the cane. "Help you?" the man asked, his tone neutral, but his eyes calculating. "Looking for work," Harrison said, keeping his voice steady despite the shame that burned in his chest. "I can stock shelves, keep inventory, handle freight. I am good with numbers and I do not mind long hours." The proprietor glanced down at Harrison's leg, then back up to his face. "Got all the help I need right now. Try the saloon down the street." Harrison knew a dismissal when he heard one. He touched the brim of his hat and turned to leave, his cane thumping against the wooden floorboards with each step. The sound echoed in his ears, like the drums that had beaten the time for soldiers marching to their deaths. The saloon owner told him the same thing, as did the blacksmith and the livery stable operator. By the time the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Harrison had exhausted every business in Wheatland and was no closer to finding employment than when he had arrived. His leg ached from the walking, a deep throb that radiated up into his hip and made him want to lie down and never get up again. He found himself standing in front of a modest house on the outskirts of town, a single-story structure with white paint that had weathered to gray, and a small porch with 2 rocking chairs. A wooden sign hanging from the porch railing read, "Rooms for rent inquire within," in neat script. Harrison hesitated, counting the coins in his pocket and calculating how long they would last. He had enough for maybe a week if he was careful, and then he would be sleeping under the stars with winter coming on fast. Before he could talk himself out of it, he climbed the 3 steps to the porch and knocked on the door. The sound was sharp in the evening quiet, and for a moment he heard nothing. Then footsteps approached from inside, light and quick, and the door swung open to reveal a woman who took Harrison's breath away. She was perhaps 25 years old, with dark hair pulled back in a simple bun and eyes the color of warm honey. Her face was lovely, but there was a weariness to it, a sadness around her mouth that spoke of grief carried, but not surrendered to. She wore a plain gray dress with a white apron tied at the waist, and when she looked at Harrison, her gaze went first to his face and stayed there, not dropping to his leg or his cane. "Can I help you?" she asked, and her voice was soft but strong, like a river flowing over smooth stones. "I saw your sign," Harrison managed, "about the room." "Come in," she said, stepping back to allow him entry. "I am Diana Abbott. I have one room available at the moment." Harrison removed his hat as he stepped inside, taking in the clean but sparse interior. The front room served as a parlor with a settee and 2 chairs arranged around a small fireplace. Everything was tidy and well maintained despite the obvious age of the furnishings. Harrison Vance, he said, I just arrived in town today. Diana closed the door and gestured for him to follow her down a short hallway. She walked with purpose, her skirts swishing softly, and Harrison did his best to keep up without letting his limp become too pronounced. She showed him to a small bedroom with a single bed, a dresser, and a washstand. A window looked out over the grasslands behind the house, and the last rays of sunlight streamed through the glass to paint everything golden. $3 a week, Diana said, turning to face him. That includes breakfast and supper. I provide clean linens once a week, and there is a pump out back for washing. I expect my boarders to be respectful and quiet after 9 in the evening. That sounds fair, Harrison said, even though he knew his money would not last long at that rate. I will take it. Diana studied him for a moment, and Harrison braced himself for the inevitable questions about his leg, about where he had come from and why he was limping. But she simply nodded and held out her hand. First week in advance, please. Harrison counted out the coins and placed them in her palm, their fingers brushing briefly. Her hands were rough with work, he noticed, the hands of someone who labored hard for what little she had. Thank you, Miss Abbott. Mrs. Abbott, she corrected gently. I am a widow. My condolences, Harrison said automatically, and Diana's expression softened into something almost like a smile. It has been 2 years, she said. The grief is still there, but it has become part of me now, rather than something separate. Supper will be ready in an hour. Come to the kitchen when you are settled. She left him alone then, and Harrison sank down onto the bed with a sigh of relief that was half physical and half something else he could not quite name. The mattress was thin but comfortable, and the room smelled faintly of lavender and sunshine. He lay back and stared at the ceiling, trying not to think about how he would find work or what he would do when his money ran out. An hour later, he made his way to the kitchen at the back of the house and found Diana stirring a pot on the cast-iron stove. The room was warm and fragrant with the smell of beef stew and fresh bread, and Harrison's stomach growled loudly enough that Diana glanced over her shoulder with a hint of amusement in her eyes. Sit, she said, gesturing to a small table with 2 chairs. It is just you and me this evening. My other boarder is away visiting family. Harrison sat, grateful to take the weight off his leg, and watched as Diana ladled stew into 2 bowls and set them on the table along with thick slices of bread and butter. She took the seat across from him and bowed her head briefly before picking up her spoon. Harrison followed suit, mumbling a quick grace, and then they ate in companionable silence. The stew was good, rich and hearty, and Harrison found himself eating faster than he had intended. Diana noticed and rose to refill his bowl without comment, and he felt a rush of gratitude that made his throat tight. Were you in the war? She asked after a while, her tone casual, but her eyes watchful. Harrison's spoon froze halfway to his mouth. He set it down carefully and met her gaze. Yes, madam, Union Army. My husband was as well, Diana said quietly. He did not die in battle, though. He came home with a sickness in his lungs that never left him. By the time winter set in, he was gone. I am sorry, Harrison said, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. He had seen what disease could do to soldiers, how it killed slowly and cruelly, stealing a man's dignity before it finally took his life. Everyone lost someone, Diana said with a small shrug. The war took so much from so many. But we survived, did we not? That has to count for something. Harrison thought about his leg, about the shame that followed him like a shadow, about the way people looked at him and saw only his weakness. Sometimes I wonder if surviving is enough, he said, before he could stop himself. Diana set down her spoon and looked at him with such intensity that Harrison felt exposed, as if she could see straight through to the wounded places he tried so hard to hide. Surviving is everything, she said firmly. It is the foundation on which you build whatever comes next. You are here, breathing, with your heart still beating. That is not nothing, Mr. Vance. Harrison did not know what to say to that, so he simply nodded and returned to his meal. They finished eating in silence, but it was a different kind of silence now, one that felt less lonely somehow. Over the next few days, Harrison continued his search for work with increasingly desperate determination. He tried every business in Wheatland again, then expanded his search to the surrounding ranches and farms. Each time the answer was the same, though delivered with varying degrees of politeness. No one wanted to hire a cripple, no matter how willing he was to work. He returned to Diana's boarding house each evening exhausted and discouraged, his leg throbbing and his pride in tatters. Diana never asked how his search was going, but she always had a hot meal waiting and a quiet presence that somehow made the failures easier to bear. They began to talk more over their evening meals, sharing small pieces of their histories. Harrison learned that Diana had grown up in Ohio and come west with her husband seeking opportunity, that she had no family left after her parents had died of cholera when she was young. Diana learned that Harrison had been a ranch hand in Colorado before the war, that he had joined up thinking it would be an adventure and come home knowing better. On the sixth day, with his money nearly gone and no prospects in sight, Harrison sat on Diana's back porch in the late afternoon and seriously considered moving on. Maybe a bigger town would have more opportunities. Maybe he should head further west, to California or Oregon, where land was cheap and a man could start over. Maybe he should just give up entirely. "You look like you're carrying the weight of the world on those shoulders." Diana's voice came from behind him, and Harrison turned to see her standing in the doorway with 2 cups of coffee in her hands. "Just thinking," he said as she came to sit beside him on the steps, handing him one of the cups. "About leaving," Diana said, and it was not a question. Harrison took a sip of the hot, bitter liquid and stared out at the grasslands stretching endlessly toward the horizon. "I am out of money and out of options. No one in this town is going to hire me, not with this leg." "So you will just run away?" Diana asked, and there was an edge to her voice that made Harrison look at her sharply. "I am being practical," he said defensively. "I cannot pay you rent if I have no income." "I did not ask you for rent," Diana pointed out. "And you are not being practical, you are being a coward." The word hit Harrison like a slap, and anger flared hot in his chest. "You do not know anything about me," he said through clenched teeth. "You do not know what it is like to have people look at you like you are broken, like you are worth less than you were before." "You are right, I do not know what that is like," Diana said, her voice softening. "But I do know what it is like to lose everything and have to decide whether to keep going or give up. I do know what it is like to wake up every morning and choose to survive even when it would be easier not to. And I know that running away will not fix whatever is broken inside you." Harrison wanted to argue, to defend himself, but the words died in his throat because Diana was right. He was not really leaving because there was no work in Wheatland. He was leaving because staying meant facing his own shame day after day, and he did not know if he had the strength for that. "I am so tired," he said finally, and it came out as barely more than a whisper. "I am so tired of feeling like this." Diana reached over and took his hand, her fingers warm and rough against his. "Then stop," she said simply. "Stop carrying it around like some kind of burden you are supposed to bear alone. You were hurt in the war, Harrison. That does not make you weak or broken or less than anyone else. It makes you someone who sacrificed something precious for a cause he believed in." "I do not feel like I sacrificed anything," Harrison said bitterly. "I feel like I lost a piece of myself and got nothing in return." "You helped preserve the Union," Diana said. "You helped end slavery. That is not nothing." "It does not feel like enough," Harrison admitted. "Not when I look at myself and see this useless leg and know that I will never be the man I was before." Diana was quiet for a long moment, her thumb tracing small circles on the back of his hand. Then she said, "My husband came home from the war with that sickness in his lungs, and for months he wasted away in front of me. He could barely walk from the bedroom to the kitchen without stopping to catch his breath. He was ashamed too, so ashamed that he would not let me help him, would not let me see him when he was at his weakest." "And you know what I told him?" Harrison shook his head, not trusting his voice. I told him that he walked through fire to get here, Diana said, her eyes bright with unshed tears. I told him that every breath he took was a victory, and that I did not care if he could never work again, or run again, or do any of the things he used to do. I only cared that he was alive and that he was mine. And I am telling you the same thing, Harrison Vance. You walked through fire to get here. The fact that you are limping does not diminish that. It proves it. Something inside Harrison's chest cracked open at her words, and before he knew what he was doing, tears were streaming down his face. He tried to turn away, mortified, but Diana pulled him close and let him cry against her shoulder while the sun set behind them and the prairie wind whispered through the grass. When the tears finally subsided, Harrison pulled back and wiped at his face with his sleeve, unable to meet Diana's eyes. I am sorry, he mumbled. Do not be, Diana said firmly. You needed that. Now here is what is going to happen. You are going to stay here as my boarder, and you are going to help me with work around the house in exchange for your room and board until you find paying work. I need someone to fix the fence out back, repair the porch railing, and tend the garden before winter sets in. Can you do those things? Harrison blinked at her, surprised. Yes, but I cannot just accept charity. It is not charity. It is an arrangement that benefits us both, Diana said. I need help, and you need a place to stay, unless your pride is so great that you would rather leave than accept a helping hand from a friend. The word friend settled over Harrison like a warm blanket, and he found himself nodding slowly. All right, he said. Thank you, Diana. You are welcome, she said, standing and brushing off her skirts. Now come inside. Supper is almost ready, and you need to eat if you are going to have the strength to work tomorrow. The next morning, Harrison woke with a sense of purpose he had not felt in months. After breakfast, Diana showed him the fence that needed mending, a stretch of weathered boards along the back of the property that had been damaged by last winter's storms. She provided him with tools and nails, and then left him to the work while she went about her own tasks inside the house. Harrison worked slowly and methodically, measuring each board and driving each nail with careful precision. His leg protested the standing and moving, but he gritted his teeth and pushed through the pain. This was work he knew how to do, work that made him feel useful again, and he was not going to let a little discomfort stop him. By midday, he had made significant progress, and Diana brought him a sandwich and a jar of cold water. She stood watching him for a few minutes, her expression thoughtful before she spoke. You are good at this, she observed. I used to do carpentry work between ranch jobs, Harrison explained, wiping sweat from his brow. It was never steady work, but I enjoyed it. There is a man named Thomas Brennan who owns a construction company here in town, Diana said slowly. He builds houses and barns mostly. I heard him saying last week at the Mercantile that he needed to hire more workers before winter. You should talk to him. Harrison's first instinct was to make excuses, to explain why Brennan would not want to hire him, but he caught himself. Diana was trying to help, and the least he could do was try. Where can I find him? His office is above the bank, Diana said. Tell him I sent you. That afternoon, Harrison cleaned himself up as best he could and made his way into town. The bank was one of the sturdier buildings on Main Street, a two-story structure with stone facing on the ground floor. Harrison climbed the external staircase to the second floor, his cane tapping against each step, and knocked on the door marked Brennan Construction. Come in, a gruff voice called, and Harrison entered to find a large man with iron-gray hair and a magnificent mustache sitting behind a desk covered in blueprints and paperwork. The man looked up with a frown that deepened when he saw Harrison's cane. What can I do for you? My name is Harrison Vance, Harrison said, standing as straight as he could manage. Diana Abbott suggested I speak with you about work. I have experience with carpentry and construction, and I am looking for employment. Thomas Brennan leaned back in his chair, his eyes moving from Harrison's face to his leg and back again. Can you carry heavy loads? No, sir, Harrison said honestly. But I can measure, cut, and join wood with precision. I can read blueprints and I work efficiently. What I lack in mobility, I make up for in skill and dedication. Brennan grunted, which Harrison took as neither approval nor dismissal. Diana Abbott vouches for you? She does, Harrison confirmed. Diana is good people, Brennan said, standing and moving to look out the window at the street below. Lost her husband to the war, same as a lot of folks. She does not recommend people lightly. He turned back to Harrison with a considering expression. I will give you a trial. 1 week, regular pay. If you can do the work without slowing down my crew, the job is yours permanently. If not, no hard feelings, but we part ways. Fair? Relief flooded through Harrison so intensely he felt dizzy. More than fair, sir. Thank you. Start tomorrow at dawn, Brennan said, returning to his desk. We are building a house on the east edge of town. Just follow the sound of hammering and you will find us. Harrison left the office feeling lighter than he had in years. He wanted to shout, to run, to do something to express the joy and gratitude surging through him, but instead he made his way back to Diana's house as quickly as his leg would allow. He found her in the kitchen preparing vegetables for supper, and the smile that lit her face when she saw his expression was worth more than all the gold in California. You got the job, she said, setting down her knife. A trial week, Harrison corrected. But yes, Diana, I do not know how to thank you. Thank me by doing good work and proving Thomas right for hiring you, Diana said. Now sit down before you fall down. You are flushed and your leg is probably screaming at you. Harrison sat, and Diana poured him a glass of water from the pitcher on the table. As he drank, she returned to her vegetables, humming softly under her breath. Harrison watched her move around the kitchen with easy confidence, and something warm unfurled in his chest. It had been so long since anyone had believed in him, since anyone had looked at him and seen possibility instead of limitation. Diana had given him that gift, and he swore to himself that he would prove worthy of it. The work with Brennan's crew was hard but satisfying. Harrison arrived at dawn each morning and stayed until the light failed, measuring and cutting boards, assembling frames, and ensuring every joint was square and solid. His leg ached constantly, but he learned to work through it, to position himself so that he could brace against solid surfaces and minimize the strain. The other men on the crew were wary of him at first, but when they saw the quality of his work and his refusal to complain or slack off, they gradually accepted him as one of their own. By the end of the first week, Thomas Brennan offered Harrison the permanent position without ceremony or fanfare. You do good work, Vance, was all he said, but it was enough. Harrison's life settled into a new rhythm. He worked long days with the construction crew, earning enough to pay his rent and have a little left over. He spent his evenings with Diana, sharing meals and conversation, learning the cadence of her laughter and the way her eyes crinkled at the corners when she was amused. They talked about everything and nothing, books and weather and town gossip, carefully avoiding the deeper subjects that hovered unspoken between them. As autumn deepened into winter and the Wyoming cold set in with a vengeance, Harrison found himself thinking more and more about Diana. The way she moved through the world with quiet strength, despite her own losses. The way she had looked at him that first day and seen not his leg but his face. The way she made him want to be better, braver, more than he had thought himself capable of being. He was falling in love with her, he realized one evening in early December as he sat watching her knit by the fire. The knowledge should have terrified him, but instead it felt right, inevitable, like coming home after a long journey. Diana looked up and caught him staring, and something passed between them in that moment, something electric and undeniable. What are you thinking about? She asked softly. Harrison knew he should deflect, make a joke, change the subject. Instead, he said, You. I am thinking about you. Diana set down her knitting, her hands folding neatly in her lap. Oh? I know I have no right, Harrison said, the words tumbling out in a rush. I know I am just a boarder in your house and a man with nothing much to offer. But Diana, you have changed everything for me. You made me believe I could be more than my injury, more than my shame. You looked at me and saw someone worth saving, and I do not think I can ever repay that debt. You do not owe me anything, Diana said, but her voice was unsteady. I know, Harrison said. He rose from his chair and crossed to where she sat, kneeling beside her so that they were at eye level. His bad leg protested the position, but he ignored it. But I want to give you everything anyway. I want to wake up every morning knowing I will see your face. I want to spend my evenings listening to you talk about your day. I want to be the man who stands beside you through whatever comes next. If you will have me. Diana reached out and cupped his face in her hands, her thumbs brushing across his cheekbones. Her eyes were bright with tears, but she was smiling. You walked through fire to get here, Harrison Vance, she said, her voice breaking on the words. You walked through fire and you survived, and you became this man sitting in front of me. How could I not want that? How could I not want you? Harrison kissed her then, a gentle tentative press of lips that quickly deepened into something more urgent, more real. Diana's fingers threaded through his hair, and he wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her close, marveling at the solid warmth of her against him. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Harrison rested his forehead against hers and felt something in his chest click into place like a key turning in a lock. Marry me, he said. And it was not a question, but a plea, a prayer. Yes, Diana whispered. Yes, yes, yes. They were married 3 weeks later in the small church at the center of Wheatland, with Thomas Brennan and his wife serving as witnesses. Diana wore a simple blue dress that brought out the color of her eyes, and Harrison wore his only suit, carefully mended where moths had eaten through the fabric during his travels. The ceremony was brief, and the reception consisted of cake and coffee in the church hall, but none of that mattered. What mattered was the way Diana's hand felt in his as they exchanged vows, the way she looked at him when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the way they walked back to their house through the December snow with matching smiles on their faces. That night, in the privacy of their shared bedroom, Diana helped Harrison remove his boots and trousers, her fingers gentle on the scarred flesh of his leg. He tensed, expecting revulsion or pity, but she simply traced the jagged line of the old wound with her fingertips and said, "This is part of you. It is part of the man I love. Why would I look away from it?" Harrison pulled her into his arms and held her tight, overwhelmed by gratitude and love and the sheer improbability of finding happiness when he had been certain it was lost to him forever. They made love slowly and tenderly, learning the geography of each other's bodies, and afterwards lay tangled together beneath the quilts, while the wind howled outside and snow piled against the window panes. I never thought I would feel this way again, Diana murmured against his chest. After Robert died, I thought that part of my life was over. I thought I would just exist, going through the motions until I died too. I know what you mean, Harrison said, stroking her hair. The war took something from me that I did not think I could get back. But you gave it to me anyway. You made me whole again, Diana. Not my leg, that will never be what it was. But me, the part of me that matters. You healed that. We healed each other, Diana corrected. That is what love does. It takes two broken people and makes them whole together. The winter passed in a blur of work and domesticity. Harrison continued his job with Brennan's construction crew, and Diana kept taking in boarders to supplement their income. They fell into an easy partnership, dividing chores and responsibilities without argument, learning to read each other's moods and needs. There were hard days when Harrison's leg pained him so badly he could barely walk, and Diana had to help him from the bedroom to the kitchen. There were nights when Diana woke crying from dreams of her first husband, and Harrison held her until the grief passed. But there were far more good days than bad, days filled with laughter and small kindnesses, with shared meals and quiet evenings by the fire. In the spring, Diana announced that she was pregnant. Harrison was overcome with joy, tinged with terror. He worried about providing for a child, about being a good father when he could barely walk some days. But Diana was serene and confident, reminding him that they would face whatever came together, just as they had faced everything else. Their son was born in October of 1868, a healthy baby with a lusty cry and a surprising amount of dark hair. They named him Robert Harrison Vance, honoring both of Diana's husbands, the one who had been and the one who was. Harrison held his son for the first time with trembling hands, marveling at the tiny, perfect fingers and the way the baby's eyes seemed to look right through him to his soul. "You are going to be a wonderful father," Diana said from the bed, exhausted but radiant. "I hope so," Harrison said, unable to look away from his son's face. "I hope I can be half the man this child deserves." "You already are," Diana assured him. "You are brave and strong and kind, Harrison. Our son is lucky to have you." As Robert grew from infant to toddler, Harrison discovered that fatherhood was both harder and more rewarding than he had imagined. His leg made it difficult to chase after an active child, but he learned to adapt, to play games that did not require running, to be creative in how he engaged with his son. Robert was a happy child, quick to laugh and slow to anger, and Harrison loved him with a fierceness that sometimes took his breath away. The construction business continued to grow, and Thomas Brennan promoted Harrison to foreman, recognizing his skill and his ability to manage the other workers. The additional income allowed them to make improvements to the house, adding a second bedroom and a larger kitchen. Diana stopped taking in boarders, preferring to focus on their family, and Harrison was secretly relieved to have her all to himself. In the summer of 1870, Diana became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was more difficult, and she spent much of it resting in bed, while Harrison juggled work and caring for Robert. He came home each evening exhausted but determined to do whatever was necessary to keep his family safe and healthy. Diana apologized repeatedly for being a burden, but Harrison always silenced her protest with a kiss and a reminder that she had carried him when he could not carry himself. Now it was his turn to do the same for her. Their daughter was born in March of 1871, a tiny, delicate thing with Diana's honey-colored eyes and Harrison's stubborn chin. They named her Catherine, and from the moment she entered the world, she had her father wrapped around her little finger. Harrison, who had been so terrified of not being enough, discovered that love had no limits, that his heart was big enough to hold his wife and his son, and now this perfect daughter as well. The years flowed by like water, each season bringing new challenges and new joys. Robert grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved books and building things with his hands, clearly inheriting his father's skill with carpentry. Catherine was wild and fearless, always climbing trees and chasing after her older brother, keeping both her parents on their toes. Harrison's leg never improved, but he learned to live with it, to work around it, to see it not as a limitation, but simply as part of who he was. In 1873, Thomas Brennan announced that he was retiring and selling his construction business. He offered Harrison the chance to buy it, and though the price was steep, Harrison and Diana agreed it was an opportunity they could not pass up. They took out a loan from the bank and became business owners, a prospect that terrified and exhilarated them in equal measure. The first year was difficult, with more expenses than income and long stretches when Harrison worried they would lose everything. But Diana kept the books with meticulous care, and Harrison's reputation for quality work brought in steady customers. Slowly, painfully, they began to turn a profit. By the end of the second year, they had paid off half the loan and hired 3 additional workers. By the end of the 5th year, the business was thriving, and Harrison Vance was known throughout Wyoming as one of the best builders in the territory. Success brought its own complications. Harrison worked long hours and often came home too tired to do more than kiss his wife and children before falling into bed. Diana managed the business side of things while also running the household, and the strain showed in the lines around her eyes and the gray threading through her dark hair. But they never lost sight of what mattered, never forgot the foundation they had built together that first winter in Wheatland. On their 10th wedding anniversary, In December of 1877, Harrison closed the business for the day and took Diana to the same church where they had been married. They stood together in the empty sanctuary, hand in hand, and renewed their vows privately, speaking the same promises they had made a decade earlier. Afterwards, they walked home through the snow just as they had on their wedding day, and Harrison marveled at how far they had come, how much they had survived and built together. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked as they paused on their front porch, looking out at the town spread below them. "Marrying a crippled war veteran with nothing to his name?" Diana turned to him with an expression of exasperation and love. "Harrison Vance, I thought we were past this. You are not a cripple. You are a man who was injured in the war and who has built a good life despite it. You are a successful businessman, a wonderful husband, and a devoted father. And even if you were none of those things, I would still love you just as much, because you walked through fire to get here, and that matters more than anything else." It was the same thing she had said to him all those years ago on the back porch when he had been ready to give up, and the words still had the power to move him. Harrison pulled her close and kissed her, not caring who might be watching, pouring everything he felt into that kiss. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Diana laughed and pulled him inside where it was warm. In 1880, Robert turned 12 and announced that he wanted to learn the construction business properly. Harrison began taking him to work sites on weekends and during summer break from school, teaching him to measure and cut and join wood, the way Harrison's own father had taught him so many years ago. He watched his son absorb the lessons with serious concentration and felt a swell of pride that nearly overwhelmed him. This was legacy, he realized. This was what survived when everything else was gone. Catherine, at 9 years old, showed no interest in construction, but proved to have a gift for drawing and painting. Diana encouraged her talent, saving money to buy her proper paper and paints, and their walls gradually filled with Catherine's artwork. Harrison loved coming home to find new drawings hung in the hallway, loved the way his daughter's face lit up when he praised her work. But despite the fullness of his life, Harrison sometimes still struggled with the old demons. There were days when his leg pained him so badly that he was short-tempered and irritable, snapping at workers and family alike. There were nights when he dreamed of Shiloh, of the screaming and the blood, and the moment when the mine ball had torn through his flesh. On those nights, he woke gasping and covered in sweat, and Diana would hold him and stroke his hair and remind him that he was safe, that the war was long over, that he had survived. "I am sorry," he always said afterwards, ashamed of his weakness. "Stop apologizing," Diana always replied. "You lived through hell, Harrison. No one expects you to forget that." In 1882, Wyoming was still a territory rather than a state, but wheatland continued to grow. The railroad had come through 5 years earlier, bringing new settlers and new opportunities. Harrison's construction business expanded accordingly, and they hired more workers and took on bigger projects. They built a new school for the town, a larger church, and a grand hotel that would serve travelers passing through on the railroad. With each project, Harrison's reputation grew, and his limp became less something people noticed, and more just a fact about him, no more remarkable than the color of his hair or the sound of his voice. On a warm summer evening in 1883, Harrison sat on his porch with Diana, watching Robert and Catherine play in the yard. Robert was 14 now, tall and lanky, already showing signs of the man he would become. Catherine was 12, all energy and laughter, her hair flying loose from its braid as she ran. Harrison reached over and took Diana's hand, threading his fingers through hers. "Did you ever imagine this?" he asked quietly. "When you opened your door to a limping stranger 16 years ago, did you imagine we would end up here?" Diana leaned her head on his shoulder and smiled. "No," she admitted. "I thought you would stay a week or two and then move on like most of my boarders. I never imagined you would become my whole world." "You saved my life," Harrison said, squeezing her hand. "I mean that literally. If you had not taken me in, if you had not seen something in me worth saving, I would have given up. I would have drifted until winter caught me, and that would have been the end. I did not save you, Diana corrected gently. I just reminded you that you were worth saving. You did the rest yourself. You found work, you built a business, you became this man. She gestured at the house, the children, the life they had created. This is all you, Harrison. I just got to come along for the journey. It is us, Harrison insisted. Everything good in my life started the day I met you. You are the reason I kept going, the reason I did not let the shame and the pain win. You looked at my leg and said it did not matter. You looked at me and said I was enough exactly as I was. Do you have any idea what that meant? What it still means? Diana turned to face him fully, her eyes bright. I know what it means to me. You gave me a reason to live again after Robert died. You gave me love and partnership and family. You gave me these beautiful children and this life we have built together. We saved each other, Harrison. That is the truth of it. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun sank lower, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Catherine ran up to the porch demanding water, and Diana went inside to get it while Harrison watched Robert practice hammering nails into a piece of scrap wood. His son's technique was already good, precise and confident, and Harrison felt that surge of pride again. You are doing well, he called, and Robert looked up with a grin that was pure joy. Thanks, Pa. Do you think I could come to the work site with you tomorrow? There is no school, and I promise I will stay out of the way. You can come, Harrison agreed, but you will not stay out of the way. I need someone to help me with measurements on the Morrison Barn project, and your eyes are sharper than mine. Robert's grin widened, and he went back to his hammering with renewed vigor. Diana returned with water for Catherine and a glass of lemonade for Harrison, settling back into her chair with a contented sigh. This is good, she said softly. This life we have made. It is good. It is everything, Harrison agreed, and he meant it with his whole heart. As the years continued to pass, Harrison found that his leg bothered him less, not because the pain had diminished, but because he had learned to accept it as part of himself. The shame that had consumed him when he first arrived in Wheatland had faded, replaced by a quiet confidence born of hard work and Diana's unwavering love. He walked with his cane, not as a symbol of failure, but simply as a tool that helped him move through the world, no different from the hammer he carried or the measuring tape in his pocket. In 1885, Robert turned 17 and announced that he wanted to go to college to study architecture. Harrison was surprised but supportive, even though it meant his son would leave Wyoming for the East. They saved and scraped together enough money to send Robert to a technical school in Chicago, and the day they put him on the train was one of the hardest of Harrison's life. But it was also a moment of profound pride, seeing his son set off to pursue his dreams, unencumbered by the limitations that had defined Harrison's own youth. Catherine, at 14, had become an accomplished artist. The art teacher at the school had told Diana that Catherine had real talent, the kind that should be nurtured and developed. They began looking into art schools for her as well, planning for a future where their daughter might make a living with her gift. Harrison marveled at how different his children's lives would be from his own, how full of possibility and promise. But he did not envy them. He had lived through fire and come out the other side to find love and purpose and a life worth living. His path had been harder than he would have wished, but it had brought him to Diana, and that made every painful step worthwhile. In the fall of 1888, they received word that Robert had graduated and been offered a position with a prestigious architectural firm in Chicago. He was engaged to be married to a young woman he had met at school, and he invited his parents to come for the wedding. Harrison and Diana made the long journey east, bringing Catherine with them, and stood proudly as their son exchanged vows with his bride. Seeing Robert happy and successful, knowing that the cycle of shame and limitation had been broken, was one of the greatest joys of Harrison's life. They returned to Wheatland with lighter hearts and renewed purpose. Catherine would be finishing school soon and heading to art school in Denver, and then it would be just Harrison and Diana again, the way it had been in the beginning. The prospect was bittersweet, but also exciting, a chance to rediscover each other without the demands of parenthood consuming their days. In 1890, on a crisp autumn morning, much like the one when Harrison had first arrived in Wheatland, he and Diana stood together in front of the house they had shared for nearly 23 years. The building had been expanded and improved over the decades, but it was still recognizably the same modest structure where their love story had begun. "Do you remember the first time you knocked on that door?" Diana asked, leaning into his side. "Every detail," Harrison said. "I was so desperate, so certain that no one would give me a chance. And then you opened the door and looked at me like I was just a person, not a collection of flaws and failures." "You were a person," Diana said. "You are a person. That is all you ever needed to be." Harrison turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. They were older now, their hair gray and their faces lined, but the love between them burned as bright as it had that first winter. "You told me once that I walked through fire to get here," he said. "But the truth is we both did. We both survived things that should have destroyed us, and we found each other on the other side. That is the real miracle, Diana. Not that we survived, but that we found each other." Diana lifted one hand to cup his cheek, her touch gentle and familiar. "I would walk through 1,000 fires if it meant finding you at the end," she said. "You are my home, Harrison Vance. You always have been." They kissed there on the porch, two people who had started with nothing and built everything. Inside the house, the walls held memories of laughter and tears, of children growing and love deepening, of a life lived fully despite all the obstacles that might have stopped them. Behind them stretched more than 2 decades of partnership and devotion, and ahead lay whatever years remained to be faced together as they had faced everything else. Harrison's leg would never be whole, but he was. Diana's first husband would always hold a place in her heart, but there was room for Harrison too, room for all the love and joy they had created together. They were not perfect people living a perfect life. They were broken people who had found each other and chosen to be whole together, and that was more than enough. As they walked back inside, Harrison's cane tapping against the wooden boards of the porch, Diana slipped her arm through his and matched her pace to his. They moved in sync, two halves of a whole, partners in every sense of the word. The fire they had walked through had forged them into something stronger, something that could withstand whatever storms might come. In the years that followed, they grew old together with grace and gratitude. Robert had 3 children who they visited whenever possible, teaching their grandchildren the same lessons they had taught their own children about hard work and perseverance and love. Catherine became a successful artist whose paintings hung in galleries across the West, and she never forgot to credit her parents for believing in her dreams, even when they seemed impractical. Harrison's construction business eventually passed to a protege, a young man with skill and ambition who reminded Harrison of himself at that age. He and Diana retired comfortably, spending their days tending a garden, reading together by the fire, and taking slow walks around Wheatland, while Harrison told stories of how the town had looked when he first arrived, and Diana teased him about his terrible memory. They celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary in 1907, surrounded by children and grandchildren, and Harrison gave a toast that brought tears to everyone's eyes. He spoke of arriving in Wheatland, broken and ashamed, of knocking on a door and having it opened by an angel. He spoke of learning that true strength was not measured by what a body could do, but by what a heart could endure. And he spoke of walking through fire and finding that the flames had not destroyed him, but had instead shown him the way home. Diana stood beside him with tears streaming down her face, and when he finished, she added her own words. She spoke of loss and loneliness, of wondering if she would ever feel whole again after her first husband's death. She spoke of opening her door to a stranger and seeing something in his eyes that called to something in her own soul. And she spoke the words that had become their shared truth, the words that defined everything they were to each other. "You walked through fire to get here," she said, looking into Harrison's eyes. And I am so grateful you did. Every step, every painful limping step, brought you to my door, brought you to me, and I would not change a single moment of the life we have lived together. Not one moment. Harrison pulled her close and kissed her forehead, and around them their family applauded and wiped away tears. This was legacy, he thought. This was what mattered. Not the business he had built or the buildings that bore his craftsmanship, but this, the love they had created and sustained for 4 decades, the family they had raised, the life they had shared. They lived another decade together, growing frailer but never losing the deep connection that had sustained them through so many years. Harrison's leg eventually gave out entirely, and he spent his last years in a wheelchair that Diana pushed around their property every day, showing him the flowers blooming in the garden and the sunset painting the sky in colors that defied description. When Harrison died in the spring of 1918 at the age of 75, he passed peacefully in his sleep with Diana's hand in his. His last conscious thought was of her face that first day, the way she had looked at him and seen not his limp but his heart. His last words, whispered so quietly that Diana had to lean close to hear them, were, "Thank you for opening the door." Diana lived another 5 years after Harrison's death, surrounded by children and grandchildren who loved her dearly. She never remarried, content in the knowledge that she had been blessed with 2 great loves in one lifetime, and that was more than most people ever received. She spoke often of Harrison, keeping his memory alive with stories of their early days together, of how he had arrived with nothing and built everything, of how they had saved each other when saving seemed impossible. When she died in her sleep in 1923 at the age of 81, her grandchildren found her with a smile on her face and a photograph clutched in her hand. It was a picture taken on their wedding day, Harrison stiff and formal in his suit, Diana radiant in her blue dress, both of them looking at the camera with expressions of such pure joy that it shone through the faded sepia tones. They were buried side by side in the Wheatland Cemetery, their headstones simple but engraved with the words that had defined their love. We walked through fire and found each other on the other side. Together, always. The story of Harrison and Diana Vance became part of Wheatland's history, passed down through generations. The boarding house where they had first met was preserved as a historical site, and couples visiting the town made it a tradition to stand on the porch and imagine that moment when a broken soldier had knocked on the door and a widowed woman had answered, neither knowing that they were about to change each other's lives forever. Their grandson eventually wrote a book about them, based on Diana's journals and Harrison's letters, and it became a regional bestseller. People were moved by the honesty of the story, by the acknowledgement that healing was not about fixing what was broken, but about learning to live fully despite the breaks. They were inspired by Harrison's journey from shame to acceptance, and by Diana's ability to love without trying to change or cure. But the true legacy of Harrison and Diana Vance was not in the stories or the preserved building or even the book. It was in the way their descendants lived their lives with courage and compassion, carrying forward the lessons they had learned from watching their grandparents love each other so completely. It was in the knowledge that walking through fire was not the end of the story, but the beginning, and that sometimes the most profound love stories started with one person seeing another's pain and choosing not to look away. In the end, that was what mattered most. Not that Harrison had been wounded or that Diana had been widowed, but that when they found each other, they chose to see the wholeness beneath the brokenness. They chose to build something beautiful from the ashes of what they had lost. They chose love every single day, even when it was hard, even when the old pain resurfaced and threatened to overwhelm them. They walked through fire, both of them, and they came out the other side holding hands. That was the miracle. That was the story worth telling, worth remembering, worth carrying forward into all the years to come. 2 broken people who found each other and became whole together, proving that love was not about perfection, but about seeing someone exactly as they were and choosing them anyway, choosing them always, choosing them forever. And in Wheatland, Wyoming, on quiet autumn evenings when the wind whispered through the grass and the sun painted the sky in shades of gold. You could almost feel their presence still, walking together along the dusty streets, Harrison with his cane and Diana with her hand on his arm, moving in perfect rhythm, two hearts beating as one, a testament to the enduring power of love that sees past the scars to the soul beneath, that speaks the truest words of all. You walked through fire to get here, and I am so glad you did.